My name is Ava Sinclair, and the exact second my brother realized he'd lost the company happened in a glass boardroom overlooking Manhattan, when the head of security stepped between us and said, calmly, "Mr. Sinclair, you need to leave." Chase's face did this strange flicker, like his brain tried to reboot, because 24 hours earlier, our father had stood in front of the same skyline, smiled for the cameras, and fired me like I was some intern who forgot the coffee order. And now the room was full of shareholders, attorneys, and board members who wouldn't even meet Chase's eyes. He leaned toward me, voice low and venomous. "You can't do this. Dad chose me." I smiled small, controlled, the kind of smile you practice when you've been underestimated your whole life. "Chase," I said, "Dad chose you when he believed your lies." Then I turned to the board and said the sentence that changed everything. "Call the vote. You know how some families pass down heirlooms, china sets, wedding rings, a lake house that smells like sunscreen and old money? My family passed down something else. A company. Sinclair and Rowe started as a little American label. Classic silhouettes, department store racks, holiday window glamour. My dad, Grant Sinclair, built it into a mid-sized fashion group, with one headquarters in New York, and enough recognition to get name-dropped in magazines that still smelled like perfume samples. And then he did what ambitious men do when they hit the ceiling. He tried to go global. That's where I came in. And that's where Chase started hating me. Chase is older by 3 years. He has the jawline, the handshake, the leadership presence, people confuse with competence. He was born wearing boat shoes and entitlement, and he'd tell you he earned everything, without ever noticing the invisible net beneath him. I was the other kid, the one who made myself useful, because it was safer than being difficult. Dad used to say I had a European eye, even when I was a teenager, cutting up old dresses and stitching them into something new. When I went to business school, I took every study abroad program I could. I learned how to order espresso without sounding like a tourist. I learned how to negotiate in rooms where men smiled at you like you were decoration. So when Dad announced we were opening a European branch, everyone assumed Chase would run it. Because Chase was the son. Because Chase was the heir. But Dad surprised them. He called me into his office, mahogany desk, framed magazine covers, a wall of fabric swatches like a color-coded ego, and said, "I need you in Europe. I need someone who can build it, not just pose next to it." I remember sitting there, stunned, trying to keep my face neutral. Chase found out 10 minutes later. He cornered me by the elevators. "Tie too tight. Smile too bright. Congratulations," he said. "Dad's little experiment. Chase," he leaned closer, "don't embarrass yourself thinking this makes you important. That was the beginning. Europe was hard in a way. America isn't. In New York, people will tell you, 'No,' politely, then take your meeting anyway. In Europe, 'No' means no, and they'll drink coffee while they watch you squirm. But I loved it. I built a team in London first. Buyers, merchandisers, brand people who understood that global didn't mean slapping the same logo on a different continent. We shifted production to ethical suppliers. We tightened inventory. We launched a direct-to-consumer line before our US branch even stopped arguing about whether e-commerce was a fad. When we finally opened the Paris showroom, it was small, sharp, curated, nothing like the bloated U.S. Offices full of old-school executives who still believed a fax machine was an adequate communication strategy. Within 18 months, my branch was profitable. Within 3 years, it was the thing keeping us afloat. Because the American branch, Chase's branch, was quietly bleeding. At first, I didn't know. I was too far away, too busy, too hopeful that we were on the same team. Then I started noticing little things. Invoices that didn't match. Orders delayed for no reason. Complaints from vendors I'd never met. I'd email Chase. He'd reply with 3 words. "Handled. Don't worry." When I'd call, he'd joke, "Relax, Ava. Go drink wine in Paris, or whatever you do." But here's the thing. I wasn't sipping wine. I was running. I was waking up at 4:30 a.m. New York time to catch London. I was staying up until midnight to catch L.A. I was flying so often I could pack a carry-on in 5 minutes without thinking. And the more I grew Europe, the more Chase shrank into himself. Not visibly, not in a way Dad noticed, but I noticed. At board meetings, Chase stopped making eye contact with me. He'd interrupt when I spoke. He'd clarify my points, like I was a child explaining a school project. And then it escalated into something uglier. It started at Thanksgiving, at our father's house in Greenwich. If you've never been to a wealthy Connecticut Thanksgiving, let me paint the picture. A dining room the size of a small restaurant. Place cards in calligraphy. A turkey so perfectly browned it looked fake. And a family acting like the world would end if the gravy was lumpy. Dad loved hosting. It was the one time a year he felt like a king in his own home, not just in a boardroom. Chase arrived with his wife, Blair, and their 2 kids, both sticky and loud, and adorable in that way children are, when you're not their primary caretaker. Blair kissed my cheek and said, "I wish you lived closer," like she hadn't spent the last 5 years smiling through Chase's contempt for me. I showed up alone. I was dating someone in London at the time, but I'd learned to keep my private life private around my family. Anything tender becomes leverage if you hand it to the wrong person. During appetizers, Dad clinked his glass. "I have an announcement," he said, eyes gleaming. My stomach tightened, because in my family, announcements were rarely just announcements. Dad smiled at Chase first. "My son has been holding down the fort here in America." Chase gave a humble nod that made me want to throw an olive at him. Then Dad looked at me, and Ava has done something extraordinary overseas. I relaxed a fraction. Maybe this was praise. Maybe this was a rare moment of pride. Dad continued, "We've grown Europe faster than I ever imagined." Chase's fork froze mid-air. Dad went on, "So I've decided the time has come to start planning succession. Next year, at our founder's gala, I'll name my successor." The room went quiet in that special way rich families get quiet. Not shocked, just calculating. Blair's eyes flicked to Chase, then to me. Chase's smile stayed, but his jaw tightened. Dad raised his glass. "To the future." Everyone toasted. Chase leaned toward me as the conversation resumed. His voice was soft enough that only I could hear. "You really think Dad's going to hand it to you?" I blinked. "I'm not thinking about that." He laughed once. "Sure you're not." Then he said the part I'll never forget. "Enjoy your little lead while it lasts." After Thanksgiving, the campaign began. It wasn't obvious. Chase wasn't stupid enough to declare war openly. He did it the way people like him always do, through whisper networks, subtle doubts, and carefully planted concerns. A month later, Dad called me. He didn't start with "How are you?" He didn't start with "How's London?" He started with, "I'm hearing some troubling things." I sat on the edge of my hotel bed in Milan, still in a blazer, hair pinned up, exhausted. "From who?" I asked. "Ava," Dad said, voice heavy. "From people I trust. That's how you know you're in trouble. Not because someone accused you, but because the person you love is already defending the accuser's credibility." Dad continued, "There are rumors you've been reckless." My stomach clenched. "Reckless how?" He hesitated. "Overextending. Expanding too fast. Taking risks without oversight." I closed my eyes. "Dad, my numbers are audited. The board sees the reports. The board sees what you send," Dad said. And there it was. The first real stab. Not, "Are these rumors true?" but, "I'm considering they might be." I swallowed. Is Chase behind this? Silence. And silence is an answer in my family. "Dad," I said carefully, "Chase doesn't have access to my operations." "You'd be surprised what people can access," Dad replied, and his tone hardened. "We're scheduling a review. I want you back in New York next month." A review. That's what they call it when they're sharpening the knife but don't want blood on their hands yet. When I flew back, the U.S. office felt like a museum of itself. Posters of our older campaigns, executives in expensive suits, talking about heritage like it was a business plan. Chase met me in the lobby, arms open like a brother in a movie. "Ava!" he boomed. He hugged me, tight enough to feel like a warning. "Glad you could make time," he murmured near my ear. "This is going to be enlightening." The review meeting was in Dad's private conference room. Dad sat at the head, Chase at his right, and our CFO, Diane, on the left. Papers stacked neatly, like a funeral arrangement. I'd worked with Diane for years. She was no nonsense, sharp, a woman who survived decades in a male-heavy industry by being twice as competent and half as sentimental. She wouldn't look at me when I walked in. My chest tightened. Dad gestured to a chair. Sit. I sat. Chase slid a folder across the table. We've been looking at some discrepancies. I opened it. It was a printed spreadsheet with highlighted lines. Numbers, vendor payments, marketing budgets. Those are standard costs, I said, scanning. Chase's smile was thin. Standard. If you're trying to impress Europeans with extravagance. I looked up. What is this? Dad leaned forward. Ava, why is Europe spending more on marketing than the American branch? I blinked. Because marketing is where growth comes from. And it's working. Chase tapped the paper. But we're an American company. Our core is here. I felt heat rise in my throat. Our survival is currently over there. Dad's eyes flashed. Watch your tone. That's another family heirloom. Tone policing. When they can't argue with your facts, they scold your delivery. I force myself to breathe. Dad, Europe is profitable. I can show you the... Chase cut in. And yet we've received complaints from suppliers about delayed payments. I turned to Diane. That's not true. My suppliers are paid on time. Diane finally spoke, voice tight. There were delays on a few transfers. What delays? I asked. Diane's eyes flicked to Chase, then away. The Treasury Department flagged some transactions. The Treasury Department is in New York. My money flowed through the American HQ. A cold awareness crawled up my spine. I don't control Treasury, I said slowly. Chase does. Chase spread his hands. Innocent. We're just being careful. Dad frowned. Ava, are you saying your brother sabotaged you? I stared at my father, because the real question was, are you capable of believing that? If Dad said yes, Chase was exposed. If Dad said no, I was already convicted. I'm saying, I said carefully, that if transfers were delayed, you need to look at who controls the transfers. Chase laughed, light and dismissive. Of course. Blame me. Dad's jaw tightened. Enough. Ava, we're commissioning a full audit. Until then, major decisions in Europe require approval from New York. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly. Quietly, like ice under pressure. You're putting me on a leash, I said. Dad's voice went cold. I'm putting the company first. Chase leaned back, satisfied. I walked out of that room, with my face composed and my insides roaring. That night, I went to my childhood bedroom in Dad's Greenwich house, the one with the floral wallpaper Mum picked before she died. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it. Not just anger, betrayal, because I'd spent years being the good one, the steady one, the one who delivered results without drama. And Chase had spent years being the entitled one who failed upward. Yet when he whispered concern into Dad's ear, Dad listened. I could have cried. Instead, I opened my laptop and I started pulling everything. Every transfer record, every flagged transaction, every delayed payment. At 2:13 a.m., I found something that made my hands go cold. A series of transfers from the U.S. Treasury, marked as vendor settlements, to an entity I didn't recognize. The entity's name was bland on purpose. Ridgewell Consulting, LLC. Consulting. In fashion, consulting is often code for money went somewhere and we don't want questions. I traced the payments. They weren't going to vendors. They were going to a private account. And the authorized signer? Chase Sinclair. My mouth went dry. I didn't sleep. By morning, I had screenshots, dates, amounts, and one very clear pattern. While Chase accused me of reckless spending, he'd been quietly siphoning money through consulting fees. And the European branch, my branch, was profitable enough to cover the bleed. So he was using my success like a sponge to soak up his theft. I wanted to storm into the kitchen, slam my laptop down on the marble counter, and scream, "Look what your golden boy is doing." But I didn't, because I'd learned something the hard way. In my family, truth without strategy is just a tantrum. So I played it smart. I called an attorney, not the company's attorney, not Dad's friend, mine. Her name was Marissa Klein, and she sounded like someone who'd never apologized for taking up space. When I laid it out, She didn't gasp. She didn't moralize. She asked, "Do you have access to the shareholder registry?" I swallowed. "Not directly." "Then we get it," she said. "And Ava? Stop thinking like a daughter. Start thinking like a CEO." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Start thinking like a CEO. That was the problem. My father wanted me to be a daughter. Chase wanted me to be a subordinate. Neither of them wanted me to be a threat. Over the next weeks, Chase tightened the screws. New approvals required. New reporting demands. Random compliance checks. He'd email me at 11 p.m. New York time and demand a reply in an hour. Then forward my delay to Dad-like evidence of incompetence. At one point, he scheduled a video call with my European team and dropped in, unannounced, smiling like he owned them. They smiled back politely. Afterward, my head of merchandising in London, Nina, messaged me privately. "Is he always like that?" I typed back, "Worse. Don't worry, I've got it." And I did. Because while Chase was busy playing politics, I was building something else. Leverage. I reached out to key shareholders quietly, carefully. Sinclair and Rowe wasn't public, but we had outside investors. Family, friends, funds, people who cared less about Dad's ego and more about returns. I didn't say, "Chase is stealing." Not yet. I said, "I'm concerned about governance." I said, "I want to ensure continuity." I said, "If there's a leadership transition, I want the company protected." And because my numbers were undeniable, people listened. They'd seen what Europe was doing. They'd seen how the brand was evolving. They didn't want the company handed to a man who treated profit like a birthright. The real turning point came at the founders' gala, the night Dad planned to name his successor. If you're imagining something subtle and dignified, no, it was fashion. It was dramatic by definition. The gala was at a midtown venue with white orchids, runway lighting, and a wall of cameras hungry for family mythology. Dad loved mythology. Self-made, legacy, vision. I arrived in a black dress with clean lines and no sparkle because I didn't need sparkle. Chase arrived like a politician, hand on Blair's back, smiling at photographers like he'd already won. Backstage, Dad pulled me aside. He looked older than I remembered. Not physically, he still had that sharp suit and expensive cologne, but in his eyes, a weariness that didn't belong to him before. "Ava," he said quietly, "whatever happens tonight, I need you to understand I'm doing what's best." My throat tightened. For who? He flinched, like I'd slapped him. "I'm naming Chase," he said. There it was. No warm-up. No maybe. No we'll see. I stared at him. Why? Dad's jaw clenched. Because stability matters. And because the board has concerns about you. I almost laughed. The board, I repeated. Or Chase. Dad's eyes flashed. Enough. You've been combative. Combative. The word men use when women refuse to shrink. I wanted to show him everything right then. The Ridgewell transfers. The pattern. The theft. But I didn't. Because the gala wasn't the battlefield I needed. It was the stage Chase wanted. So I swallowed my fury and said, "If you do this, you're making a mistake." Dad's face hardened. "I'm your father." I met his eyes. And I'm the reason this company is still breathing. His mouth tightened. Then the music swelled. And it was time. Dad went out on stage, spotlight hitting him like a halo, and gave a speech about legacy. He thanked our team, our customers, our shared dream. Then he called Chase up. The room erupted in applause. Chase hugged Dad, face visible to cameras, expression perfectly calibrated, grateful son, humble heir. Then Dad turned to me. "Ava Sinclair," he announced, voice steady, "has made valuable contributions overseas. Valuable contributions, like I'd volunteered at a bake sale. But after careful review," Dad continued, "we've decided to restructure leadership. Effective immediately, Ava will no longer serve as Executive Director of European Operations." For a second, I didn't hear applause. I heard blood rushing in my ears. I saw Blair's mouth part, in a little, "Oh." I saw Nina, who'd flown in from London, stiffen in the front row, eyes locked on me. I saw Chase's smile widen like a blade. Dad extended a hand toward me, like he expected me to come up and accept my own execution politely. The cameras swung my way. That's the thing about public humiliation. It dares you to react, so they can call you unstable. So I did what I'd been trained to do since childhood. I smiled. I walked on stage. I took Dad's hand. I leaned into his microphone, just enough for the cameras to catch my calm. "Thank you," I said clearly. "I hope the company survives the choices made tonight." A ripple moved through the room, confusion, discomfort. Chase's eyes narrowed. Backstage, he cornered me immediately. His voice was sweet. "You handled that well." I tilted my head. "Did you expect me to scream?" He shrugged. "I expected you to beg." Then he leaned close, and his smile fell away. "Here's what's going to happen," he whispered. "You're going to go quietly. You're going to sign whatever Dad puts in front of you, and you're going to stop calling shareholders like you're somebody." I held his gaze. "And if I don't?" Chase's eyes glittered. "Then you'll find out how easy it is to erase you." There it was. Not a brother. A threat. I could have hit him. Honestly. Instead, I said, "Enjoy your night, Chase. It's your last one." He laughed. "Sure, Ava." Then he walked away to take pictures like a king. I left the gala before dessert. Outside, Manhattan air slapped my face cold, and for a second, I just stood on the sidewalk under the city lights and let myself feel how insane it was. I'd built the most successful part of our company, and my reward was being fired in public. But when I got into the car, I didn't cry. I opened my phone and texted Marissa, "It's done. Tomorrow." Her reply came immediately. "Good. We're ready." I went home, poured a glass of water like it was whiskey, and laid out my evidence on my dining table like a war map. Ridgewell transfers, internal emails, treasury authorization logs, and the most important thing of all, a list of shareholders who'd already agreed quietly to support me. Chase thought the gala was the finale. He didn't realize it was just the teaser trailer. The next morning, Dad called me at 7:02 a.m. His voice was clipped. "I need you to come in." I sipped coffee slowly. "To what?" "I don't work for you anymore." "Ava," Dad snapped. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Make it ugly." I laughed once. Sharp. "Dad, you made it ugly on stage." Silence. Then Dad said, softer, "Chase is telling me you've been contacting shareholders." I leaned back in my chair. "Chase tells you a lot of things." Dad's voice hardened. "Stop. This is not your company." I felt heat rise in my chest. "It's not Chase's either," I said. "Not yet." Dad exhaled. Frustrated. "He's CEO. Appointed by you," I said. "Not elected by governance." Dad's tone went dangerous. "You are my daughter. Do not challenge me." And there it was again. Not business. Power. Family power, I said quietly. "You taught me to fight for what I build." Dad's voice dropped. "I taught you loyalty." I almost said, "You taught me obedience." But I didn't need to win the argument. I needed to win the war. So I ended the call with, "I'll see you at the meeting." "What meeting?" Dad demanded. I smiled at my empty kitchen. "The one you weren't invited to," I said. And I hung up. At 9:30 a.m., the special shareholders meeting convened. Chase didn't know until 9:17, because we did it legally, quietly, through proper notice and voting rights. He burst into the boardroom like a storm, tie slightly crooked, face flushed. "What the hell is this?" he barked. Diane was there, looking pale. Marissa was there, calm as ice. The shareholders were there, some in person, some on screen. And Dad? Dad arrived last, confused, furious, eyes darting like he'd walked into the wrong funeral. He looked at me. "Ava, what are you doing?" I stood, following the bylaws. Chase snapped. "This is a coup." I turned to him, voice level. "No, this is governance." Dad slammed a hand on the table. "I am the chairman." Marissa spoke before I could. "Mr. Sinclair, you are currently chairman, but the shareholders have the right to call this meeting and vote." Dad's nostrils flared. "Who are you?" Marissa smiled politely. "Ava's counsel." Chase pointed at me like a child tattling. "She's manipulating you. She's bitter." I looked around the room. If I'm bitter, it's because I watched this company get drained, while I worked myself into the ground to keep it alive. Chase scoffed. You always make it about you. No, I said, and this time my voice sharpened. You made it about you when you started stealing. The room went still. Dad's face drained. What? Chase's smile faltered. What is she talking about? I clicked a remote. The screen at the front of the room lit up with a spreadsheet. Ridgewell Consulting, LLC. Dates. Amounts. Authorized signer. Chase Sinclair. Diane's breath hitched. Dad stared, blinking like his brain, refused to accept the shape of the truth. Chase recovered fast, too fast. That's, he said quickly, that's consulting. Vendor relations. Totally legitimate. Marissa stepped forward. We subpoenaed Ridgewell's incorporation records. Chase's jaw tightened. Marissa clicked again. A document appeared. Ridgewell Consulting LLC, registered to Blair's cousin, who lived in Florida and ran a lifestyle blog. Chase's voice rose. That's not. I held up my hand, stopping him. Then I looked straight at Dad. While you were accusing me of reckless spending, I said, Chase was routing company money through a fake consulting firm, tied to his wife's family. Dad's mouth opened slightly. I didn't stop. And when my suppliers complained about delays, I clicked again. Treasury held my transfers under Chase's authorization, so he could point at the delays like evidence. Diane whispered, Oh my God. Dad's eyes went glossy. Chase slammed his hands on the table. This is a misunderstanding. I leaned in, voice low and lethal. A misunderstanding is grabbing the wrong coat at a party. This is theft. Chase turned to the shareholders, desperation creeping in. She's twisting numbers. She's been out of control in Europe. A shareholder on screen, an older woman named Judith Klein, cut in. Mr. Sinclair, Judith said, voice like sharpened steel. Europe is the only reason we didn't pull our investment last year. Chase blinked. Judith, and, she continued, we're tired of family drama costing us money. Another investor spoke, a man from a private equity fund. We asked for transparency for months. We got excuses. Dad looked like he might be sick. Chase's voice went frantic. Dad, say something. Dad stared at him, and the heartbreak on his face was so raw, it almost made me look away. But I didn't, because heartbreak doesn't pay severance. I said softly, Dad, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this because you handed the company to someone who would burn it to stay in power. Dad's shoulders sagged. Then he whispered, almost to himself, My son. Chase seized on it. Exactly. I'm your son. She's... Dad's head snapped up, and for the first time in my life, I saw my father look at Chase, not as an heir, but as a stranger. Dad's voice was rough. How long? Chase froze. What? How long have you been doing this? Dad demanded. Chase's eyes darted. Dad's voice broke. How long? Silence. That's when Diane, quiet Diane, finally found her courage. She slid a file across the table. 2 years, she said. We suspected. We couldn't prove it. Until Ava. Chase's face went white. Diane, you... Diane's voice shook, but she held it. I covered for you, because I thought you'd stop. And because your father didn't want to see it. Dad closed his eyes, like the sentence physically hurt. Then Marissa cleared her throat. The shareholders have prepared a motion, she said, to remove Chase Sinclair as CEO and board member, effective immediately. Chase shot up. You can't. Judith's voice came through the speaker. We can, and we will. Dad's head snapped toward me. Ava, I met his eyes. You can stay, Chairman, if you want to fight this, I said quietly. But you'll be fighting the people who actually own the company. Dad looked around at the shareholders. He saw their faces. He saw their certainty. And I watched the moment he understood. This wasn't his kingdom anymore. It never really was. He swallowed hard. What happens to me? I didn't gloat. I didn't sharpen the knife. I said, you become Chairman Emeritus. Honorary. You keep your legacy. You don't run daily operations. Dad's eyes filled. I hated that part. I did. Because I loved my father, even when he failed me. But love doesn't mean surrender. Chase hissed. You're taking everything. I turned to him. No, I'm taking back what you tried to steal. Then I looked at the room and said, clearly, call the vote. The board secretary read the motion. Hands raised. Voices confirmed. Digital votes logged. It wasn't dramatic like TV. It was worse. It was clinical. Final. When the motion passed, Chase's face went slack, like his body couldn't hold up his ego anymore. Dad stared at the table. Marissa spoke again. "Mr. Sinclair," she said to Chase, "you're now removed. Security will escort you out." Chase laughed, but it cracked. "This is insane." He looked at Dad. "Dad, tell them no." Dad didn't move, didn't speak. Chase looked at me then, hatred burning through his shock. "You think you're better than me," he spat. I stepped closer, voice low so only he could hear. "No," I said. "I think you're exactly what I always knew you were." His eyes widened. "What?" he snarled. I held his gaze. "A boy who needed Daddy's crown, because you never built anything yourself." His face twisted. He leaned in, voice shaking. "You don't get to talk to me like that." I smiled cold this time. "I do now." Security appeared at his side, 2 men in suits. Professional, calm. Chase jerked away. "Don't touch me." One of them spoke politely. "Sir, please come with us." Chase looked around the room, searching for an ally. Blair wasn't there. She'd stayed home with the kids. There was no one, just a room full of people who cared about numbers more than blood. Chase's shoulders sagged. Then he pointed at me, voice loud, desperate. "She's ruining this family." I didn't flinch. I said, loud enough for everyone, "You ruined this family when you decided love was something you could invoice." Chase's face went red. Security moved again. And that's when it happened, the moment I opened with. The head of security stepped between us and said, calmly, "Mr. Sinclair, you need to leave." Chase's mouth opened. No sound came out. He walked out stiffly, like his body was trying to pretend dignity still lived inside him. The door shut behind him, and in the silence that followed, I finally exhaled. Dad didn't look at me for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was small. "I did this," he whispered. I felt tears sting my eyes, and I hated them for showing up now, when I'd worked so hard to stay still. "You did," I said softly, "but you can choose what you do next." Dad swallowed. "I wanted stability." I nodded once. So did I. Diane cleared her throat gently. "We should discuss interim leadership." Judith's voice came through the speaker. "Not interim. Ava should be CEO." A murmur of agreement rose. Dad flinched, like the word hurt. CEO. Not daughter. Not helper. Not experiment. Leader. Marissa looked at me. "Are you prepared to accept?" I glanced at Dad. He looked broken, and for one sharp second, I felt 12 years old again, wanting his approval like oxygen. Then I remembered the gala, the microphone, the public firing. I remembered Chase's whisper, "Erase you." I turned back to the room. "Yes," I said. "I accept." 2 hours later, I walked out of that building as CEO. My phone buzzed non-stop. Texts from Europe, from investors, from journalists who smelled blood in a legacy brand. And then a message popped up from an unknown number. "You're dead to me." I didn't need to ask who it was. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. Because death, in my family, had always been metaphorical. They killed you with silence, with exclusion, with rewriting history until you questioned your own memory. But I wasn't afraid of their silence anymore. I was done, begging to be seen. That night, Dad asked to meet. Not at the office, at the Greenwich house. When I arrived, the place felt haunted, too quiet, too polished, like it was holding its breath. Dad sat in the living room, with a glass of bourbon he barely drank. He looked up when I entered. "Ava," he said, voice rough. "Sit." I sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Dad said, "Your mother would have been proud of you." My throat tightened painfully. Mom died when I was 21. She was warmth. She was the only person who could soften Dad's hard edges without getting cut. She would have been heartbroken too, I said quietly. Dad's eyes glistened. "Yes," he swallowed. "I thought Chase was safer." I let that sit between us. Then I asked, "Why didn't you listen to me?" Dad flinched. "Because when Chase came to me, he sounded afraid." I stared. "Afraid of what?" Dad's voice cracked. afraid of losing his place. There it was. Not fear of the company failing. Fear of losing his throne. Dad rubbed his forehead. I thought if I gave him what he wanted, he'd calm down. I felt anger flare again. So, you sacrificed me to soothe him? Dad's shoulders sagged. Yes. I sat back, letting the truth settle. Then I said, that's what you taught us, Dad. That Chase's feelings were emergencies, and mine were optional. Dad looked like the words physically hit him. I'm sorry, he whispered. I believed he meant it. But apologies don't rewind, I said softly. I'm not here to punish you. Dad's eyes lifted, hopeful. I'm here to set boundaries, I continued. You'll keep your honorary title. You'll attend events if you want. You'll be treated with respect. Dad nodded, breathing shaky. But, I said, voice firm, you won't interfere. You won't undermine me. And you won't let Chase use you like a weapon again. Dad's mouth tightened. He's my son, and I'm your daughter, I said. And my voice softened, just a fraction. And I'm still here. Dad closed his eyes, tears sliding down his face. I didn't move to comfort him, not because I didn't care, because comfort was how my family erased consequences. The next week was a whirlwind. We issued a press statement, leadership transition, new governance standards, internal review. We quietly suspended certain executives loyal to Chase. We opened an investigation into Ridgewell and any related entities. Blair called me exactly once. Her voice was brittle. What happens to Chase? I kept my tone calm. He'll have legal representation. Blair inhaled sharply. You're really going to let him be prosecuted? I said. He really chose to steal. She went quiet. Then she said, low, he said you always wanted this. I laughed once, humorless. I wanted a brother. Blair's breath hitched. I didn't soften it. I wanted a father who didn't make me earn love with numbers. I continued. I wanted a family that didn't need someone to lose, for someone else to win. Blair whispered. The kids. I'm not touching the kids, I said immediately. They didn't choose any of this. Blair's voice cracked. He's blaming you. I know, I said. That's what he does. After the call, I stared out my office window at the city. Manhattan looked the same as always. Busy, indifferent, sparkling. And I realized something. The company didn't care who my father loved more. The company cared about competence. And for the first time, I was letting myself care about that too. The hardest part wasn't firing Chase. It was the family fallout. Because, in families like mine, accountability feels like betrayal. At Christmas, yes, Christmas. Because of course the universe has a sense of irony. Dad insisted we host a small dinner. Just us, he said. To heal. Heal. The word sounded ridiculous in a house where everyone used manners like armor. I didn't want to go, but I did. Because part of leading is walking into rooms you'd rather avoid. The table was smaller this time. No extended family. No friends. Just Dad, me, Blair, and the kids. Chase was absent. Obviously, the empty chair felt like a ghost. Halfway through dinner, Blair set her fork down and said, he said you always hated him. The kids were in the other room, watching a movie. The sound of animated singing drifting faintly through the halls. Dad, Froze. I didn't hate him, I said quietly. I hated what he did. Blair's eyes flashed. You took his life. I took a slow breath. He took his own life when he decided theft was easier than growth. Blair's lips trembled. You could have handled it privately. Dad's voice cracked. We tried that. Blair looked at him, shocked. Dad stared at his plate. I knew something was wrong, he admitted. I just didn't want to see it. My chest tightened, because that was the real twist, the one nobody talks about. It wasn't just Chase's greed. It was Dad's denial. And denial is a kind of betrayal too. Blair whispered, so you let him? Dad looked up, eyes wet. I let him because I didn't want to lose him. Blair covered her mouth. I swallowed hard. And in that moment, something shifted. Not in a magical movie way, but in a real way. Dad finally saw the cost of how he'd loved his son. And Blair finally saw that I wasn't the villain in her husband's story. After dinner, when Blair left, Dad stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped. Ava, he said softly. I paused. He swallowed. I'm proud of you. I stared at him. He'd never said that without adding a condition. Never said it like it mattered more than his ego. My throat tightened. Thank you. Dad nodded once. Don't. Become like me. The sentence landed heavy. I said quietly, I won't. And I meant it. The legal process moved slowly, as it always does. Chase tried to negotiate, tried to threaten, tried to paint me as vindictive, but the paper trail didn't care about his feelings. Eventually, he took a deal, restitution, resignation, restrictions. He didn't go to prison, not in the dramatic way people want, but he lost the only thing he'd ever believed made him valuable. His position, his narrative, his crown. And the funniest part? A year later, I ran into someone who'd worked under Chase in the U.S. office. He said, It's weird. The place feels lighter now. That's what happens when you remove a person who hoards power like oxygen. Air returns. Life returns. So here's what my life looked like after. I split time between New York and London again because Europe was still my heartbeat, and America was still home. I rebuilt the US branch the way it should have been built years earlier. Leaner, smarter, customer first, not ego first. I promoted people. Chase ignored quiet talent who'd been shrinking under his loudness. I instituted governance rules. Dad never wanted transparent approvals, independent audits, real accountability, and I learned something that surprised me. You can love your family and still refuse their version of you. You can grieve who they wanted you to be and still become who you actually are. Because the lesson wasn't win at all costs. The lesson was simpler and harder. Stop negotiating your worth with people who benefit from you doubting it. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped letting them destroy me. And when my brother's shadow finally stopped hanging over everything I built, I realized I'd been waiting my whole life for permission to lead. Turns out, I didn't need permission. I needed proof. And I had it in numbers, in votes. In the quiet moment, a boardroom chose competence over entitlement. Sometimes revenge isn't screaming. Sometimes it's paperwork. Sometimes it's governance. Sometimes it's simply refusing to play the role they wrote for you. And when you do that, you don't just inherit a company. You inherit yourself.